Welcome. If this is your first time joining us, I am Dr. Paul VanValin, and your host and guide through the next hour. We've been doing these webinars on the third Thursday of every month, with the exception of December and then January, due to significant stress that I had. So I chose last month to talk about stress. We're going to review just a couple minutes of that as we get into our presentation today. I'm going to shrink this down. Okay, my video's working. I don't have an assistant today, so I'm trying to monitor chat and so forth while we go. I'm hoping you all can hear and see. The main point is to be able to see the PowerPoint, which we will be sharing. This is recorded and placed on YouTube, and all the previous recordings are there, so that there's a PowerPoint and audio recording that's played as a film, and this will be on there as well. The links are on our website. Just by way of personal introduction, I've been leading Eden Counseling and Consulting for 20 years. Eden Leaders Institute used to be called Eden Family Institute. We've, since 2012, have really made a focus on leadership training and development. I also happen to be a husband and a father of 3 young men, and before that I was a preacher's kid. Last month we talked about stress. Many of you know that I had gone through some personal trials. House flooded in September. We literally moved out of our house in September, back in December, and the stress change units on the Holmes Ray scale were the highest I've ever had in my life. During that same window of time, I essentially started a new branch of our organization by hiring a psychiatrist. He chose to retire within 9 months. And so all these changes led up to one of the most stressful periods of time in my life. I'm a fairly resilient person. I did get a cold. Later I did get an infection, but I am recovering from those things and anticipate to be 100% very soon. So we talked about stress. One of the metaphors that I reference is we have a ball of energy, psychological, social, spiritual, relationship energy, and it's all you've got. You have to feed it so you don't get burned out. You have a bowl that contains stress as it flows in. You need to be able to turn that spigot. And when we get stress overflowing and not enough psychological, social, spiritual, relational energy, we reach burnout. Leaders are different than normal people. They have to be. They envision things that other people don't see. They work to pursue things that other people wouldn't want to be involved in. They love adventure and change. They're highly motivated to see things improve. And as a result, they have more stress than other people do. This requires more resiliency. And as a result of the last talk, you'll get a survey today. You'll be asked if there's something you would like us to expand on, learn about. There was a request for more on resiliency, and that's where we're going today. In the last training, we defined resiliency as the ability to recover quickly from illness, change or misfortune. Buoyancy is a metaphor. We rise to the top if we are resilient. We don't get pulled down, buried beneath the stresses of life. And another metaphor is elasticity. So the property of a material that enables it to resume its original shape or position after being bent, stretched, or compressed. So these metaphors of bouncing back, being able to recover, that's what we're dealing with here. So I'm going to mute. It's not working. If you have your microphone on, if you would mute it so that we don't have background noise, and at the end we will open for questions. You can turn your microphone on at that time, and that'll be great. In contemplating this concept, I was reflecting on the commandments of God. Love the Lord your God with all your heart. That would encompass passion, spirituality, all these things that are life-giving. All of your soul, which is synonymous in Greek with thought. So your faith, elements of your personality, all of your strength, your physical being, those things that support our physical being, money, food, shelter, clothing, and loving your neighbor as yourself. As I was contemplating this topic, thinking about these elements, the leader who is able to function in these 4 domains effectively is essentially, through difficult times, proves a tremendous amount of resilience. And obedience is required of our Lord. And I was reflecting on elements of leadership, focusing on John 10 recently, the Good Shepherd. And you have lambs and you have sheep. Lambs may be a developmental metaphor, may actually apply to children, but a developmental metaphor for young believers. And God does something for young believers that are immature. He kind of feeds them. They often have really pretty amazing, wonderful experiences. There's a great sense of nurture and wonderment. But Paul says they are fed the milk of the gospel, and later we have to be fed the meat. And so this hard to digest protein source gets entered into the system at some point. And mature faith is not just receiving. That's sort of immature. The mature faith is interactive and to the point of death. I will be obedient even if it kills me. That's powerful faith. Requires a lot of discipline. Paul writes often of discipline. I beat my body so that I can run the race and win the prize. And then we have metaphors of warfare. The mature Christian is prepared to do battle. So these are much harsher metaphors and realities for people who are mature in Christ. And certainly leaders need to be resilient in times of stress, in times of warfare, in times of attack. And so that's what we're exploring here. In terms of what directs us to obey, we have several elements. We have the Word of God. You have your specific call on your life, whatever your role is, whether you're a pastor, associate, assistant, marketplace leader. You have a call on your life, and as you follow it, you're being obedient, with the expectation that if God is sending you forward, He will provide what you need to meet the demands of your call. We, however, have to be wise as we move forward. We need advisors. So some simple advisors are your doctor, sometimes your spouse, but hopefully a council of individuals that you rely on to help you. I recently required some medication. The doctor said, take this for 14 days. I will be faithful to do that. Not everybody does, and the results are that you become less resilient. So I just wanted to throw out this concept that I think that obedience with clarity of direction, obeying the right sources, is a huge part of developing resilience so you can complete your mission. I often quote from secular research. I think I'm discovering that God has me in a position of a kind of apologetics, defending the gospel with social science research. And it delights me when my discipline discovers things that are very biblically compatible, validating truth. We live at least in America, we live in a world of cynicism and doubting of authority. And so I think it's becoming more and more important that we are providing authentic proof that God's word is true, and obedience pays off. So we have the work of Donald Meichenbaum, very, very powerful psychologist. And that's his website there. And so I'm just going to show you some things about his work with children. Our God, our creative Father, is a developmental being. He allows things to develop. So individuals, families, marriages, organizations, churches, there's a developmental process, and leaders. And so we have, in order to have a resilient organization, you have to have a resilient leader. And its origins often come in childhood. And so we'll talk about that in just a minute. Another point I wanted to make, though, is that I think resilience applies to the individual, it applies to the organization, and it applies to cities and nations as well. When I was in New York after 9/11, I was astounded with how things were mobilized. This is 9/11, 2001, the World Trade Center disaster, and seeing leadership engage in such a way as to both effectively try to deal with the grief and loss, but with this ever-moving forward vision. And I was up recently in Brooklyn and just looking across the water at the new tower and reflecting upon all that's transpired in the last 15 years. Just amazing. I contrast that to my trips to New Orleans after Katrina. So we had 9/11 in 2001, we had Hurricane Katrina in the Gulf in 2005, and worlds of difference. You go to New Orleans in 2006, 2007, 2008, and there's clear evidence of a kind of stagnation in terms of some development. I don't mean to be overtly critical of people who live in that region, but it was very different to contrast that with New York. And I think that reflects on leadership, It reflects on perhaps the value of the region. New York is a center of commerce. That's its origins, commerce and growth and development, and and leadership. That's the history of the city. Whereas, to be quite blunt, New Orleans' heritage was based in piracy, and you see just different infrastructure, you see different value, you see different ways of responding to things, and so you contrast these two cities, one being, in my judgment, way more resilient than the other, and that I think is true of many, many entities. So resilience is a term that's used in different ways. We talk about capacity. He's a resilient individual. The expectation is this person would be able to cope, adjust, or recover. It's also a process. He manifests great resilience as he was moving through this difficult part of his life. And it's all about adaptation, rising to the challenge, facing things head on, and making things work in contexts where other people wouldn't be able to make them work. The evidence of resilience is in the ability to face and handle stressful life events. And while you're in it, and then also while you're integrating the wisdom and knowledge from it to create a positive life experience. Many, many people get stuck in the negativity of loss, of danger, of damage, and effective leaders have to guide them through to the other side. Here's a little story that I shared probably once before in this training. In about 12 years ago, I separated from one of my colleagues. We started Eden with 3 partners, and in 2004, I became the sole owner of Eden Counseling Center. And it was a difficult time for us. And my former partner was really struggling with some things, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to separate from him. And it eventually ended up in him losing his license. He made some really, really bad choices. But while he was in this state of dysfunction, he really hurt some people. People that had served him well, had worked really hard for him. As he was heading out the door, he said some things that really damaged fairly fragile people. Some of my staff are not well educated. They're not greatly resourced, and they were really hurt. So
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm on my thing.
yeah, if you could mute your microphone, please. That would be very helpful. So
Look at how great this is.
So someone, if you would
Who's
please mute
on?
your microphone. Let's see. I can't do it. I thought I could. Yeah, but if you are aware that your microphone is on, if you would please mute that. So I led my group through what I believe is a biblical response to being harmed. You know, we took a look at Matthew and talked about loving your enemies, blessing those who curse you, pray for those who despitefully use you. And so I led them in a daily prayer for about a week, and then a weekly prayer for about 3 months, where we just prayed a blessing. Very simple. Bless. We named my partner. Bless. We named his wife. We named his children. We named the organization that he was forming. And that was very important to lead them through the negativity so that they did not end up seeing themselves as wounded and victimized. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes, where people can get stuck with this. So it's the ability to confront, move through, and integrate into the new normalcy in a constructive way. It's also evident in the ability to maintain some stability while you're moving through difficult things. Being resilient doesn't mean you won't show evidence of stress. I've had 2-3 year periods in my life, substantial stress evidence, broken down in my sleep patterns, my appetite, my mood. But resilience is bouncing back and coming out of it constructively. And one of the things that we'll look at is the actual positive outcome. So evidence that a person is resilient, they bounce back, they beat the odds. And leaders need to live at a top 10% level. Leaders need to be in the top 10% physically, emotionally, relationally, educationally, maturity-wise. Otherwise, we really don't have what it takes. We have the capacity to move from pain into something positive, and our faith is a big part of that, which we'll get into in a minute. And so across time, a really effective leader will have ups and downs, but you'll see this trajectory. If you were to graph capacity, life experience, success, you will see the good leader overcoming things and moving forward in a constructive way. And these concepts, I think, are very important. We move from victim, if we indeed did not instigate the negative thing we're going through. We are victimized at times, but we quickly move to a positive sense of survivor, and then perhaps thriver, which isn't a real word, but Meichenbaum uses it. So we can come out of things better than before. And that's post-traumatic growth in this last bullet is certainly possible. I believe God has helped me move through in that way. So post-trauma, we talk about the negativity of trauma, because for most people it really is. Going through it is terrible. And trauma comes from a concept that we have gone through something that was a threat to life or limb, and we've since expanded it to threats to identity, stability, security. And this is not a talk on trauma, but most of you are somewhat familiar with the concept. So the ability to think through difficult times, Romans 8:28, we know that on all things God works for the good of those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose. There's some caveats there, loving God and called according to his purpose. But for those of you who have gone or are going through tough times, in the course of your call, in other words, you are being obedient and things get tough, don't let the negativity define for you that you're off course. There are times when we just have to move through, and positive can come from that. James 1, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. He goes on to say that that builds endurance, perseverance, endurance, and character. God is really interested in your character, is my opinion. Philippians 4 is just a great chapter. I quote elements of it all the time. Begins in verse 6, don't be anxious. Verse 9 tells you how to think to create a positive expectation. And the empowerment comes from Christ. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. So a theology of suffering, a theology of growth, a theology of how God can take difficult times is essential to be an effective leader, whether you lead in a church or the marketplace or government or whatever. So evidence in post-traumatic growth, this is now my stuff, my own reflection. We moved away from Meichenbaum. This is my testimony. I believe that out of the last period of time, I developed clarity of vision that was new for me. And so here's the result, one of the concrete results. I went through this tough time. I believed God wanted me to do something different. Hired a good friend to be my coach. My wife and I spent many hours praying, thinking, and I came to the conclusion that I needed to totally restructure my relationship with my organization. And so this was 2012. Now in 2016, my time invested in providing direct services is diminished. The economic return of my own labor is up 30%, and the growth of the company is up 30% as I am spending much more time developing people within my organization, developing relationships with leaders in the community. So I had to create capacity to move out, and I needed to be just stuck for a while until something and everything would come together in a positive way. New insight. You know what your stamina is when you hit the wall, and everybody does at some point. You hit the wall, you begin to learn, okay, these are my limits. And the metaphor of building an altar, when you've been through your worst period of your life, if we were to follow the pre-written eras of culture that are oral tradition and visual monuments, we would build an altar, we would name it, and we would look back to it and realize God met me at this time. I was having this discussion with a pastor who said, oh yeah, I get it. He pulled a pen out of his pocket. I use a different pen for different periods of my life. This is my, we got to grow this organization pen. And so he had a box, and he'd go back and look at his pens and acknowledge where God had met him at different times in his life. Figuring out your way to do that so that you're able to look at today and say, this is a bad day, but it's not my worst day. This is a good day. And any day that's not any worse, that is better than your worst day, you'll survive. And so we use our difficult times to help create an expectancy with a hopeful and positive perspective, laden with gratitude. Every day that I wake up feeling good, I am grateful. I'm right now looking out on beautiful flowering trees. It's 70 degrees here in Norfolk, Virginia. And I'm just grateful to be able to feel good about seeing what is good. I've experienced times in life when no matter what was going on, I couldn't feel good. So sometimes difficult times, including the dark night of the soul, creates a more mature character. And so this is a theme that all leaders have to be able to embrace. If it doesn't break you, and if God is still working in you, you can come out the other side. St. John of the Cross wrote about the dark night of the soul, a time when you didn't perceive connection with God, didn't feel your prayers are going anywhere. And the reassuring word from spiritual directors is God is doing a purifying in your soul. So it may not quite, I may have linked some things here that you could argue maybe don't exactly link together, but it made sense to me. We look at Jesus himself, who was tested in the desert. He goes into a place, he's by himself, he faces Satan. Satan tempts him. He tempts him with providing for people. He tempts him with taking a position of public ruling. And Christ says, no, no, no. And then in Matthew 4:11, as the devil left him, we have no idea what kind of state he was in, but it must have been pretty rough because angels came and attended him. And this concept of not being alone is critical for effective leadership. I unfortunately have a wealth of negative outcome stories about leaders, and I've added to my list. Just this week I learned of a fellow that I've known for 4 years. He's referred a lot of people to our ministry. I've spoken in his church. And I just learned today that he was being charged with a felony that has to do with finances. Very effective leader, powerful speaker, author, but the culture in which he works is he's fairly isolated in terms of his position, and so choices were made that things have come unglued. These choices that he made will affect the 600 people in his church. It'll affect the 50 or so pastors he has mentored and their congregations. So you're looking at a fallout immediately of several thousand people, plus all the negative press that's being developed about him and leaders like him, which has implication for all of us. So this, there are many cautionary tales about not functioning alone in leadership. So a developmental perspective, taking a look at how this develops. And anytime I study development that is well crafted, well understood, seems real, it seems to affect the many aspects of life. So as I talk about the development of childhood resilience, I'm sure you will see that the elements required to develop a healthy child have parallel to healthy leader, healthy church, healthy business, healthy community, healthy nation. And there are indeed some nations more resilient than others. So this is coming from the Center on the Developing Child. This is from Harvard. And you can look this up online and find sources like this pretty easily. So I'll just read this with you. Resilience depends on supportive, responsive relationships and mastering a set of capabilities that can help us respond and adapt to adversity in healthy ways. So relationship and capabilities or skills have to develop working together. It's those capacities and relationships that can turn toxic stress into tolerable stress. And I've done teaching with you all on happiness and well-being, and shared with you all that the capacity to have positive emotion, to be able to engage the mind on singly for long periods of time, to have meaningful relationships, to have meaning in the activities of our life, and to have a sense of accomplishment. When we're cranking all those cylinders, we're calling life good. And I have experienced 4 of those not working, but the relationship component, God has always kept in place for me, and that has been a real redeeming component in helping me through difficult times. And sorry about that, folks. It is the single strongest buffer against stress. So as children develop, they have a caregiver that they interact with. And the term that this author uses is serve and return, and the development of scaffolding, which is, you kind of picture scaffolding as like bars and things you can climb on, hang things on, build things on. So there's certain basic things to create these scaffolding for the development of resiliency. And serve and return means there's an event that occurs and we can interact with someone. And this engagement changes us, may change the caregiver, and creates this scaffolding. And so this is essential to develop these, in the next bullet, the ability to plan, monitor, and regulate behavior and adapt to changing circumstances. So planfulness, to be able to pay attention insightfully and see what's going on, to adjust yourself to that, adapt to changing circumstances, this has to develop. So children have to have a modicum amount of stress, but not overrun by stress. They have to learn to manage stress appropriately in the context of someone who is helping them understand their world. And so when children are traumatized with no adult help, they have to make the best sense of it they can. And since they don't have adult brains, it often creates kind of distorted coping mechanisms that can go into adulthood as rather primitively defined defenses. And it's much easier to work with kids and help them develop well than it is to work with adults and try to help them rebuild things in their life when they didn't have the effective foundation to start with. Um, the absence of the caregiver develops a prolonged stress response that over time can be potentially damaged. Children cannot grow up alone. They just can't do it. So the 5 domains that affect a child's development, I would argue, are the same domains that affect adult leadership development. Family, personal characteristics, genetics, friends and mentors, school, and community. And we'll take a look at the elements that are critical here. And they're real common sense kinds of things. A loving family. There is nurture. There is more nurture than criticism. Some of us weren't raised in those kind of environments, but we can change that. So it's really important that children are raised in an environment of encouragement. We encourage one another to love and good works. There's an identity. There's a family cohesion. We belong. We know who we are as a group. There's care. And stress and conflict isn't totally absent, but it is manageable for all the beings that are in the house. And there's a style of parenting, and I would state a style of leadership, differentiating authoritative from authoritarian, at least for the most part. Authoritative leadership, including parenting, allows for giving direction, giving instruction, but there's interaction. You want children, and I would argue I want my developing leaders to be able to navigate, negotiate, make wise decisions, not just be blindly obedient where they cannot function independently. And so authoritarian environments, including churches, countries, families, create individuals that have a limited capacity to develop wisdom. Whereas that's authoritarian. So authoritative is this strong, clear, well-bounded, well-disciplined method of leading that allows for dialogue, that allows for this scaffolding to develop, that allows for exploration, allows for mistakes, But there's a time for authoritarian, and that is in a dangerous environment, you want your children to obey right now. Stop. Don't go into the street. Come to me right now. And this would, I believe, manifest itself in leadership positions. There are times when I, in my role at Eden, must say to someone, this cannot be. Stop. This is dangerous. Now, I'm working with adults, so they're not exactly obedient, but they're reasonably responsive, which is about all you can hope for when you're dealing with with humans. So these are elements of healthy family, and then personal characteristics. I'm so sorry. I have allergies, and they result in spastic coughs when I talk. So hope. Some people are just born with more. I tend to not be. I tend to be raised in the kind of critical, pessimistic, cynical vein. That's sort of my natural bent. And there's a place in the kingdom for people like that. So I've had to learn to be much more hopeful. We need to develop realistic confidence, not false confidence. False confidence, there's a kind of an ethos in the public schools now where we want everybody to love themselves at all times under all circumstances. And so we'll conform the environment so that happens. And it's just not realistic. People have to be able to endure some stress. They have to become skilled so that their confidence is based in competence. And that allows them to become independent. The social skills listed here are critical. And I would say they're critical for effective leaders, for leading leaders, for mentoring leaders, for developing healthy children into independent adults. The ability to be responsible, to be able to let go of self-justification, to own ownership for the good, the bad, the indifferent. The ability to engage others in an empathic fashion, to work cooperatively, to be appropriately assertive, which means to express yourself directly and clearly without sin. Ephesians 4. Be angry, but do not sin. Don't let the sun go down in your wrath. Don't give the devil a foothold. So the assertive expression is one that is descriptive and direct, but not judgmental, not overly critical. And then a wide variety of interpersonal skills are important. This next point, delay gratification. It is the single, research would argue that in terms of success, it is the single personal characteristic that will predict significant success. I mean above average success. The capacity to put off gratification, to go to school, to go to graduate school, to invest your money, not to spend it on something immediately. All this requires delaying gratification, to delay sexual gratification, to wait until you choose a life partner, to not marry too soon, too quickly. All these things help us build a really, really good life. Same goes with organizational development. To not be too quick just to put people in leadership, to not be too quick to bend your mission to someone who's a donor. All these things have to do with the ability to delay gratification, manage your impulses, and show restraint. The fruit of the spirit of patience is right in line with all this stuff. Stress tolerance, problem solving, and all this stuff will pull together to create a realistic, positive sense of self-esteem. Genetics, I'm just going to touch on quickly. Um, you ask, the nature-nurture argument comes up a lot in social science. Well, are you born that way or did you develop that? Almost everything is a mix. So intelligence is a mix. You can be born with the aptitude to become intelligent, but if you don't interact with the environment in a way that helps you to learn and grow and develop, you'll never reach your potential. So all these things that are listed here in bullet one, self-control, happiness, assertiveness, stress tolerance, there's a personality component to that. Some people are more naturally happy, more ebullient, more outgoing. And intelligence varies widely. So I just wanted to just mention that as a reality, that if you were fortunate enough to have good genes, we bury my people at 99, 100, 101. I'm shooting for 120. I'm claiming Genesis 6. Genes does indeed make a difference. Now the people that are around a child, and again, taking that metaphor to around you as a leader, around your people that you lead, positivity is so important, to be around positive people. And so nurturing is gigantic with kids, and I would argue it's gigantic with adults too, although we tend not to seek it out as overtly. When I tell somebody I'm proud of them, I'm happy to have them on my team, it makes their day. It makes their day. To know that you're thought of well, Becky just started, in January, she decided that she would, on every day of the month, send an email to the people who dwelt in the office of that number. And we have 21, 25, we have 28 offices. So just about every day, she can pick someone, including weekends she does this. So on day one, she writes to the individual or individuals in office one, I'm praying for you, thinking about you. And as well as she knows them, and John 10 says the shepherd knows his sheep. She specifically writes these things out. The response has been incredible. Everybody responding back with, this is so meaningful. I'm so glad to be working in this environment. And then they will say, how can I pray for you? So it's interactive. It takes her about 3 minutes to do this. Type out a few emails, send them off. Huge, huge return on that. A child's role in a group of children affects everything. If they are popular or average, just kind of normal, that's positive. If they are neglected, last one picked for volleyball, stuff like that, that's negative. To be rejected is extremely negative. And so there can be a zero tolerance for bullying in every environment, including leadership roles. I have known many very effective leaders who were bullies. So they were effective in terms of whether it's making money or accomplishing some goal, but in terms of manifesting the fruit of the Spirit, not so much. And then children do have mentors. It could be teachers. Coaches often have a powerful role. Even going to summer camp and having some effective interaction can hugely redirect a child's life. So all these elements are present, and I would argue they need to be present all of our lives. To feel that you belong in a community, you have a place, you have pride in what you do. I want people at Eden who are proud to work at Eden. I want people who carry the mission in their heart, that what we provide is transformational, that we are directed by God to a higher calling. That's what I want in everybody. And so we want every child to grow up in a home, in a community, in a church that has this sense of connectedness, positive identity, forward moving, and safe, definitely safe. So that's a little snapshot on the developmental components. I want to jump now to the American Psychological Association, and we're looking at a handout you can get from them that's readily available. I actually sent it out in email. Looks like this, so you can just follow along on that if you like, peruse it later. This is the exact handout that they provide. The APA.org website has lots of consumer-ready handouts. You can go put a topic in a search bar, and some of their website is restricted, but there's a lot for the public. And so I go there when I'm just researching simple things. I go to the National Institute of Mental Health website. I'll sometimes just sort of randomly hit one of the big research universities, Johns Hopkins, Duke, and it's just amazing what you can find that is really useful. So this handout comes from the APA.org, and I've just simply put the 10 bullets here, and we'll talk about them a little bit. Number one is always social support, that you live your life in fellowship, ideally with 3 or more close people. Ecclesiastes 4, a cord of 3 strands, who can break it? And so all of my research, going back to when I started doing research in this area in 1979, all the research argues that social support is the number one buffer against the effects of stress, therefore the number one component in remaining resilient and recovering from stress. So you have people around you that love you, you love them, you have some wise people, you know some people older than and wiser than you, some people you are mentoring. All that mix creates a great resilient community. So secondly is perspective. It is having a theology, a practical psychology of how life is, accepting a few things, working to change those things we can change, and avoiding thinking that you can call catastrophic thinking or negative forecasting thinking. There is certain cognitive work that describes these as errors in human thinking. And so I frequently remind myself, my staff really looks to me to solve problems. I'm a decent problem solver, and not everybody is. Hopefully, if you're leading an organization, you are, or you have somebody right next to you that's really good at it. And so, they will often be catastrophizing. Oh, this terrible thing happened, and it's often an emotional thing. Somebody responded emotionally to something, passed on. The emotion's contagious, and by the time it gets to me, it's this huge, awful thing. And so my response to people when they are speaking faster, louder, higher, I go lower and slower, and I say, this is not a problem. We've had worse days than this. We've had much bigger problems to solve than this. Let's sit down, talk this through, and come up with a solution. It's an opportunity. What Heaven quotes, this is an opportunity to show how smart we are. Let's put our heads together and make this work. One of the things that most people do is they resist change. So this third bullet speaks to the majority of the population, that we need to lead people through accepting the reality that life does not remain consistent, that times of great prosperity are just times of prosperity, that times of great walking through the valley of the shadow of death is another passageway to some other place. And so this, and most leaders have this value for change, this value for adjusting, this value for adaptation. You just have to remember that not everybody has it. And so you have to lead people through this. We model by responding with lower and slower, calm, problem-solving approach, empathic, not diminishing other people's emotions, but empathic. We calm them. We help them be less afraid, and they will then accept their role in making change rather than defending against change. When we defend against necessary change, it creates all kind of mess. We end up with psychological defenses that don't work, denial, self-justification. We end up pursuing addictions because we don't think we can handle life. Just a big mess. I thoroughly believe that God, if He's called you to a particular purpose, will provide what is needed if we do our part in obedience in that direction. So leaders will typically take action, which is a really important part of this. So moving toward your goals, not oh no, what can I do? I am really troubled when I do feel stuck. Had a thing happen this week, was not happy with it at all. I had a therapist abruptly quit. Not happy with it at all. She'd only been with us a month, seemed to be doing great. Turns out her plan all along was to come join us for a short season, build a caseload, and start her own practice. I was not happy with that. I viewed it as a kind of theft, kind of subterfuge taking place there. So I had to decide what to do with her, and it was just a few hours, but I don't like indecision. I didn't want to be hasty, so I just had to wait and ponder and think. But as soon as I'd made a decision, now we could move forward with this plan. So in this case, it was getting her out of the environment as quickly as possible so that we could respond to the current reality in a positive fashion. So we do take decisive actions. And and don't be shocked when people you are leading, even pretty substantial leaders, you find them avoiding problems, not telling you things that they should tell you. This is real common. People get wrapped up in their own sense of shame or fear of judgment, and oh, maybe if I fix this, the boss won't notice kind of stuff. They just don't go away. It is necessary to engage at times in negatively charged conversations in order to figure things out, to find proper motivation for change, to, and if there needs to be grace and forgiveness, to figure that out. One of the phrases I coined for myself years ago was better mad than sad. People that are afraid or frightened or sad have diminished energy. Anger is an energizing emotion. So I'd rather you tell me something, make me mad, and let's fix it, rather than hiding something. And that's true of myself as well. I'd rather deal with it emotionally, psychologically, relationally, and move forward as are most leaders. So another part of development, one of the things I've been real unhappy with some of my peers, I'm 60 years old. I got another 60 years to go. But a lot of people my age, including substantial leaders, they're like coasting. They're like, I know all I need to know. I've got everything in place. And then the whole concept of retirement is abhorrent to me. Just the thought that you just kind of shelve yourself and play shuffleboard or golf or something, for leaders, that just doesn't fly. We are not people that seek comfort. We are people that seek growth and development. Therefore, stress is involved. Therefore, we have to be resilient, to recap from the beginning. But so one of the things that I am actually called to do is help people see the opportunities for self-discovery. And self-discovery usually occurs in bad times. That's when you learn the most about yourself. That's when your faith is tested. That's when you learn the limits of your capacity. That's when you learn how to be truly reliant upon God. That's when you know how you begin to learn what are the resources I have to pull together to make this work. So we have a positive attitude that we will grow and develop, and we have to lead people in that same direction so they're able to embrace the challenge. Okay, here we go. Cohesion. I was in the Army, and I never had to face actual warfare, but we had war games. So we wore laser gear. It's called miles. It stands for something. And you would actually fire lasers out of weapons, and then sensors would direct a hit. I wasn't very good at it. I got killed almost within minutes of every single conflict. But what happened was the common enemy creates a cohesion within the unit, and that's what helps people survive in war. You believe that your buddy will take care of you, and you're willing to give yourself for your buddy, and it is this social context that I think needs to be in the church as well. I need to know that people have my back and that I have theirs. They're not going to be a source of gossip. We're going to work through this together. And so this whole social thing, point of view thing, developing stress and the skills to deal with it thing, all that comes together for resilience until you're able to fully nurture a positive view of yourself. And 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 literally, I mean, it's taken a while, but I really can't imagine anything that could come my way that I wouldn't be able to rally resources to deal with, including natural disasters. I think about that. We live in a hurricane, not a hurricane zone. So we have nor'easters that come in and they'll batter the seaside homes and create flood issues, and we have hurricanes that come through. And the assumption, if you're familiar with Southeast Virginia, the Outer Banks and all the Barrier Islands were probably formed in storms and will go away in storms. So there's a large population that lives pretty precariously. And so I've pondered, what would happen? I've built my business here, built my life here. What if a giant storm comes through and we're wiped out? And I've never really been afraid of that because of relationship. I know that inland in the United States, there are people that love me, family, friends. Yeah, sure, it wouldn't be fun to start over, but it would certainly be possible. That's resilience. That's this expectation that, it doesn't matter what happens. And I know when my worst days are, absolutely. I can tell you when my worst days were, how they developed, what caused them. And I haven't had a worst day in 5 years now. I could have another one. And if so, I will trust that God will provide the resilience to work through that. But as it stands now, I've been enjoying a number of years of relational, emotional, psychological prosperity. Not so much financial. We're working on that, but and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for that. So, what I was hoping that we would be able to accomplish today in our presentation. Oh, I got a few more. Sorry, I was missing my own outline. So, perspective, and our faith gives us this perspective. The leader is the one that has to form the perspective for those that follow. Other people are only going to be tied up with their tasks. So the leader can't afford to get down to a lower elevation, that 30,000 foot perspective, all that business. That's real. We have to be able to see and anticipate and have wise counsel so that we can look ahead. So we have to keep things in perspective. And so here's a phrase that I use. It's a comes from Gordon MacDonald's book. It escapes me right now. Most of you have read it. Where he says, "Don't let other people define emergencies for you." That's a great concept. I deal with people a lot of times who are emotionally burdened, and I can't let their emotional burden define reality here. So I keep things in perspective, and I know my people. So if I'm dealing with a person who tends to be really emotionally driven, I'll take 20% off the top, just because that's who they are, and then look at the seriousness of it. But I always let myself define emergencies, and here's how I define emergencies. Someone is going to die. That's it. That defines an emergency. So whenever anybody tells me, oh, this is critical, this is a crisis, I immediately ask myself, do I see evidence of death? Do I see imminent death? No, it's not an emergency. And you don't want to be sarcastic or turn people off or be unempathic, but empathizing with their emotions, listening to their story, and then gently pointing out how we can just calm down and work together and solve this is essentially declaring it a non-emergency. I had a patient who did that all the time. She said, her word was crisis. Oh, I have a crisis. And everything was a crisis. So after working with her a while, I said, this isn't a crisis. And she said, what do you mean? It's terrible. I said, no. And I defined crisis. Crisis is someone's going to die, some horrible thing's going to happen. This is an inconvenience. And I worked with her to develop this concept. And so she came in the next week and said, I know you don't think this is a crisis, but this is a crisis. And she shared her story. But pretty soon, it dropped away. And she began using terms like, this is a problem. This is something I don't like. And the language that we use affects our emotionality. It affects how we categorize events. It affects our planning. It affects everything. So helping people put things in a context and a language that makes it doable is the leader's job. We translate reality into truth that we can follow and move forward with. Maintaining a hopeful outlook. In my worst days, I really believed that wisdom came from suffering. I've always believed that. And as a kid, I was afraid that God would have some terrible suffering for me. And my suffering hasn't been as bad as many, but I didn't like it. So I really have always believed that out of suffering can come wisdom if you do stuff right. But when I'm in the midst of it, I would say angrily, God, there better be some wisdom in this. Something good. You better hold to your promises. And I think God can handle that kind of intensity when his children are really, really frustrated, as I was. So, but even in doing that, in engaging God, almost like wrestling like Jacob, I mean, we're still engaging God. We're still in the game. We're still maintaining a sense of hope, even though we're not feeling it. Taking care of yourself is real important. We sent out a self-care assessment. Looks kind of like this, but our logo's on top. I edited this from some work that was done. This is a secular piece. So it doesn't talk about going to church. It talks about attending a community of faith, stuff like that. But it covers the essentials. And so I offer this to you to maybe do a little self-assessment. Am I physically taking care of myself? Eating, sleeping, exercise, regular medical care. Doing nice things for me. If it's in your world, get a massage, sing, dance, so forth. Psychological self-care. Taking time off for yourself. Positive self-reflection. Pursuing those things that are enriching. Doing some of the spiritual disciplines like journaling, solitude, things like that. Emotional self-care, spiritual self-care. So this little scale, relationship, workplace, hits on loving the Lord your God with all your heart. That's the emotional, psychological, spiritual self-care. All of your soul, that's the thought process, your beliefs, Strength is the physical being, and I get broken down in sleep. That's one of the first things that shows me that I'm going off the edges there. And then neighbor love, loving your neighbor as yourself. So I just offer this to you, just something for you to look at, do some self-assessment. In every dimension that you are strong, celebrate that, move forward. And if you find yourself neglecting yourself, do something about it. Make yourself a more resilient person. I mentioned a gentleman earlier that tragically had made some bad choices. And I have a friend in Oxford in England. And he and I were talking one day, and I had just started something pretty big. And he said, Paul, you're a robust leader in a fragile system. And your job is to create a robust system so that you don't burn out. Never forgot that. I'm going to repeat it. You're a robust leader in a fragile system. And your job is to create a robust system so that you don't burn out. And so self-care for the leader also involves really attending to and getting consultation and realistically assessing, are we building a robust system, or is it going to be fragile? Am I always going to be putting out fires? Am I always going to be totally drained by the way these things are running? And so I would pitch that in with the kind of self-care that's listed on this sheet, that you are seeking guidance, counsel. I really love coaching people that are seeking to create strong, resilient organizations. And then developing personal coping tools. And this is going to vary from person to person. My coping tools include physical activity. I'm a high D personality on the disc. I love exercise. I'm an introvert. I love exercising alone. So when I go to the gym, it's earbuds in, eyes straight ahead. Nobody talks to me. I'm not a social guy in that context. And I love running for longer periods of time, an hour or so, because it's just in my own space, in my own head, and it's exercising the stress out of my body. Now, you may be a personality that you prefer a more passive approach. You just love to stretch out, take a nap, read a book, watch a little TV, which I also enjoy. But learn who you are and what best rejuvenates you. What brings you joy? What brings you rejuvenation? So relaxation has to be part of it for everybody. Spiritual disciplines such as journaling, meditation, and then everybody just needs healthy distraction sometimes. Every now and then I just find myself thinking thoughts that are too negative, entertaining a mood that just isn't any good. And so I have this DVD that I throw in. The title of the movie is "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" And it's built on Greek legend, myth, and it just cracks me up. It's just hilarious to me. So I don't even watch the whole thing. I'll pop it in, watch 10, 15 minutes, and it just eases some of the tension. We have to be careful with entertainment. There's a lot of entertainment that can actually move us into a negative state, including comics, humorous folks who write and use dark material as content. I was watching one such comic with a friend, and we watched it for a while, and it was really dark. I mean, this guy it was funny. People were laughing, but as after a few minutes, I thought I would not want to be spending my time with this stuff in my head all the time. I wouldn't want to be writing this content. I wouldn't want to be having to take these very sensitive issues and creating this dark humor. So anyway, I find that I just need stuff that's just nonsense sometimes to help my kind of ease my mind and that sort of thing. So healthy distraction can include entertainment. It can include artistic expression. That's really healthy. If you're playing piano, you really can't think about anything else. It's not possible to worry and play a fast arpeggio or other kinds of things. So creative expression is really, really wonderful, but not everybody of us has developed that stuff, although you can. We live in a coastal city. We have these art shows. It's all old people that have retired, and they're learning how to do art and make little things out of metal, and some of them are good and some are lousy, but they've repurposed their lives into something that's meaningful for them, and they're moving forward in that way. So I think maybe I've come to the end of I have. So it's just me running this. I usually have an assistant, and I'm looking to see. I don't see any chat. Do any of you have any questions or comments or things that you would like to run by me? We have about 6 minutes left. And you can use the chat feature and send a chat, or you can now turn your microphone on and just say something. I'll sit quietly for a minute. I will take the silence to mean either you couldn't hear anything I said or we're good. Oh, we have a question. Okay. What is the question? Takes a second for these chat things to work through the internet. Okay, so great question. What's the follow-up for this material for a large church organization? So we have some guests from a local large church. What would next steps be? I hadn't actually planned that, but my reaction would be individually encourage one another to take a look at self, maybe have some discussions among top leadership. How do we assess whether we are building a robust or a fragile organization? How do we assess the temperament of the people going on? Oh, I got a warning that some of you may not be seeing a good picture. Anyway, it went away. So I think next steps could be, this happens to be a group I know very well that are asking the question. I mean, we could sit down and talk about some of this stuff, and that could be a next step. But I think leaders educate themselves. I mean, if any of these ideas that I've thrown out are useful, you think useful, you can email me and I can send you more resources. You can look up resources, begin dialogue with amongst your leaders, discussion amongst your leaders, and all the things that I'm talking about, because they're researchable, they are they can be duplicated. Everything that we have that's why I go to research, because there are constructs that can be measured and duplicated. So all these 10 things in terms of developing resilience, they can be duplicated, and the PERMA stuff I talk about, positive emotion, engagement of the mind, relationship meaning, they can be measured and increased. And so what social science is doing is providing opportunity for practical application where those principles are biblically compatible. So that's kind of what this is about. So I would say next steps are top leadership, take a look at this content. Do we have interest in doing a little more with it? Do we have interest in engaging Paul any further with it? Those are all options. Now, I noticed we have some Romanian guests coming in, and unfortunately, I don't think we got the word out soon enough that daylight savings time has occurred here in Virginia. So some of my Romanian guests are likely to be coming on in the next few minutes, and we are actually done. So I will be putting up a sign saying that to go to the web. We'll post this very quickly, that this can be viewed online. We'll be doing another training next month, and that training, I haven't decided yet. My life has gotten so crazy with all the stuff I've mentioned previously. So when you get a survey, and if you like see something that you would like to expand on, it's likely to occur. I have been compiling, we just have a minute, I've been compiling training I've been doing for the last 15 years, and building a manual, and the working title is Lead Like the Good Shepherd. I'm kind of excited about this. I hadn't realized how much I'd done until I saw this these are just handouts, pretty substantial work. And so I'll be perusing that as well and trying to decide what might be useful to share with you all. And I also have friends that we can bring on board as well. So we will be planning in April, the third Thursday of April. I got a feeling several Romanian friends are going to be coming on in the next hour, and they will have joined us, I think, in daylight savings time in April. The time change has been unfortunate. But anybody got any parting questions or thoughts? In answer to what's next steps, I think next steps would include discussion, perusing this stuff, taking a look inside. If you find yourself in a place of near burnout, do something about that. Seek some consultation, get some guidance, pull together your cord of 3 strands, work it out. There's joy in the journey at every facet, even when things are tough. So what I'm going to do is close in prayer, and you should all be getting a survey soon to fill that out. I'm going to post a sign for folks that may be coming on after noon daylight savings time. And so let me close in prayer. Father, I'm grateful for those called to serve you, your children, and as we're helping to raise lambs and sheep worthy of your kingdom, help us to be worthy of your kingdom as leaders. So in our physical, emotional, spiritual, relational health, help us to be disciplined and to pursue excellence in all things. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. So I'm going to be leaving this up. I'm actually going to be creating a slide that will say that we have actually ended this for those that are coming on late. And you all have a great day, those that have been on. Feel free to reach out to me at any time, and we will proceed next month with more